My next guest is Katie Trowbridge. She has over 2 decades of experience as a teacher and mentor. She is the president and CEO of Curiosity to Create, a nonprofit organization focused on helping educators incorporate creative and critical thinking strategies into their existing curricula and build creative classroom environments. Katie is also co founder of the Creative Thinking Network, an online network to assist teachers in adding creative thinking into their curriculum. Katie has won several Teacher of Excellence and Outstanding Educator awards, has a master's in teaching and a master's in education administration, and is pursuing her ED.D at Northeastern University in Boston. She currently travels around the nation speaking at conferences and training educators. Welcome to the podcast, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll start off with a question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Well, I think obviously being in teaching for over 20 years, there's been many times I've been in the trenches. But I think the one that stands out the most is when I was just struggling with student engagement. I looked forward to going to school every day. It was my passion. It was what I wanted to do. I loved teaching, but there became a time where things seemed to shift, and the student engagement, the student rapport, that connection seemed to have been dwindling, which I just remember sitting in my car sometimes thinking, I just don't want to go into school. I don't want to teach. I don't want to be here. And I knew that was an all-time low for me, because I always was so excited for school. So that's when I really thought I have to change things up. I have to figure out a way that I can find my joy and that I can bring back joy into my classroom. And that's when I started to do a lot of research into the shift in what's happening with students, why things are changing, why teachers are changing, and found that adding some creative and critical thinking seems to help. I made a lot of mistakes, but I'll tell you what, it really pulled me out of where I was in that depression and that not wanting to be in school, not wanting to go into my classroom, which was always a place that I called home, basically. And it changed quite a bit for me and pulled me out of, like you said, the trenches.
Okay. And after that time, you decided to then work more with researching and founding your nonprofit and helping educators. So we're going to dive a little bit into some of these things that you experienced yourself. So first of all, I know this has been an issue not only during the pandemic and after, but also for many years. Just the fact that teachers are struggling so much now with student engagement, and they're unhappy in their jobs. So
Right.
what should we be doing more of as administrators, as instructional coaches, and just in terms of helping our own teacher colleagues?
I think that one of the number one things I could say that will help each other is that we start collaborating with each other. I've heard from so many teachers that their departments or their schools seem very competitive, where this is my lesson. I keep it very close to myself and I don't share. I think being vulnerable and open with each other is also another thing that can really help, recognizing that we have had this shared trauma together, that we're all struggling, so we have to help each other. I really truly believe that there is power when teachers work together, and that can really change the whole way education is going. But we have to start supporting each other, helping each other, collaborating with each other, giving each other ideas, all across the nation. I think we need to stop kind of being in our bubbles in our own school districts or even in our own classrooms. I know as a high school teacher, sometimes my classroom 246, that's all I saw all day.
Yeah.
And getting out and talking to administrators, talking to coaches, talking to each other, working with each other. I really feel like that can help bring back some of the joy and engagement on the teacher's end. As far as the students are concerned, I think we've got to allow them to start looking at what we are doing in our curriculum and making some choices, finding that connection, that relevancy, and that meaning within the curriculum. I think so many teachers I've heard too are struggling with that. Why am I learning this? What does this have to do with anything? I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. So we have to make that curriculum interesting to them, something that reaches out to them.
Yeah. And then I think there's a lot of teachers that have been in the field for, 15, 20 years plus, and they recycle the curriculum.
Yes,
They might add a few things, right? And they're kind of stuck in their ways, and
right.
they're wanting to get ideas from others. So um and you're when you work with teachers and instill creative thinking, what do you try for those teachers who are a little bit resistant to change?
It's interesting because I do more of a workshop. And so I kind of have the teachers all working together. So those
Okay.
teachers who are resistant can sit and listen and not participate, but eventually they come around because they're not in their own seat with their arms crossed and grumbling and grading papers, but they actually are very interactive at their tables and at their workshop. I have found that that helps quite a bit.
Okay.
I remember when I was a kid, remember the mimeograph?
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah.
I remember even when I first started teaching 25 years ago, there were still teachers who were using that. You could tell they're still using that same old mimeograph kind of paper and not wanting to change. And part of what's going on in our world right now is a lot of change and ambiguity and being unsure of what the future is going to bring us. And that is where creative and critical thinking comes in. And that's again why I say collaboration is so important. So even the teachers who are stuck in the mud and say, I'm not changing, getting in that energy and seeing how fun that change can be. And again, supporting each other through that change. Like, man, this is hard. Man, I failed. Being able to be vulnerable and open with each other, I think pulls those resistant teachers into being more cooperative.
Yeah, and I think if they see other people do it, they'll come around, like you said. So talk to me a little bit about why creative and critical thinking are so important in all levels, K through 12. And tell me about how you would separate the two between creative and critical thinking.
Absolutely. So it's interesting if you've looked at any of the research on LinkedIn, Adobe, especially World Forum, they just came out with another report about what it is that employers are looking for. That what is it that our future will bring us? And the two top out of the 10 top skills, the two top skills, one is critical thinking, two is creative thinking, three is communication and collaboration. It's what is happening in our world in employment is people have to be problem solvers.
Yeah.
What's happening in our classroom is not necessarily problem solving, it is memorization, knowing the dates, getting that curriculum in, right? We got to get that curriculum in, we got to teach all this stuff, here's all our standards. And kids aren't being allowed, and neither are the teachers being allowed to be creative and think critically. And we've got to make sure that that is a skill that we are teaching
hmm
and be explicit in our teaching. So that's why those are two very important things. The problem is sometimes we see them as they're separate. This is
Yeah.
creative thinking, this is critical. And honestly, I like to look at it as two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So, it's one side, we have to think critically, but really when we start creatively thinking, we're doing all of this divergent thinking. We're just going in wild and crazy ideas and what if,
Yeah.
why? When we get to the critical part, it's okay, now we have all these great ideas. So which ones stand out? Which ones we think will actually work? Which ones do we really want to try? And why? So why are we going with that idea? How do you know? I ask that question quite a bit in my classroom. How do you know? Why do you think this way?
Yeah.
And allowing students to come up with those ideas, I think is critical, as well as teachers. I mean, just again, why are you teaching this way? Well, because I've always taught that way. Okay, well, we have to change. We have AI coming in. We have, students just want that A. Students just want that. Is this answer right? And we have to start going into, I don't know. Is it? Why do you think it is?
hmm hmm Yeah, and I think it's also discussing with colleagues and finding out how to maybe just work these questions into our lessons and, you know, um, ask more questions, right? It's kind of in a way in the inquiry based way
Yes.
of asking. Yeah, that's very similar. Why are we learning this, and what does it have to do with today's society, right?
Right. Right. I mean, why are we learning about, World War One?
Yeah.
What can we learn about that that's going to impact 2023? And I think that that's incredible. Why are we reading these old novels? Why are we reading Shakespeare?
Mhm.
Why are we learning how to spell when we have, on the computer, it'll change all our spelling and all our grammar. So it's
Mhm.
that it's getting that the kids to think and the teachers to think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? And just simply asking that question, why, or what if. I think
Mhm.
looking at what if the outcome to World War One was different. What would the world look like? Just getting kids to start thinking about all these different possibilities and what the future could hold, I think is incredibly important to get them to start thinking on their own, and not just thinking the way everyone else thinks.
Yeah, yeah. So what are the benefits of incorporating critical and creative thinking into your classroom, especially if a teacher feels like he or she is in the trenches?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. One of the things that I noticed when I started to do this in my own classroom was that the workload on my end was changing and shifting.
Okay.
So instead of me being on stage, and being in front of the kids, for 50 minutes or all day long, it started to become more student centered.
Yeah.
So I was more a facilitator and a guide than I was the lecturer. And that for me brought me much more joy because I had so much fun listening to what the kids were saying. My prepping was questions. I just asked a lot of questions. I did a lot of group work. I still do, even in my training. It's mostly all collaboration and group work. And I noticed a change because kids were engaging. Now, of course, you're still going to fight the cell phone and, I don't want to do this, and that's fine. Everybody has those days. I have those days. You have those days of, man, I don't want to do anything, and that's okay. But if they have other people they can depend on, that helps. I think working in groups as well, gives them a sense of belonging and connection. If it gives our teaching and our content more meaning, makes it more relevant,
Mhm.
and it can make it a classroom much more fun, because we're moving, we are changing around things, we are thinking about these amazing possibilities, we are keeping super open-minded, we are
Yeah.
taking risks without being afraid of failure, and that can change a whole sense of community within a classroom
Mhm.
and a
Yeah.
department.
Yeah, yeah. And it also helps when teachers are observing one another, right? Doing maybe in their own PLC, but also throughout the schools, and maybe learning from each other for just getting kind of seeing how that changes over time. So, is that something you recommend a lot in your workshops?
Absolutely. I was in a great PLC when I was teaching. And I think working in PLCs is incredibly important. One of the things I think we have to remember is that open-minded, deferring judgment and being
Yeah,
empathetic when we're working in groups, right? So the person next to you, we all teach differently. And the person next to you in your PLC might teach in a different way that you doesn't fit for you. And that's
yeah.
okay, right? We have to learn that have people do things differently and embrace what they're doing, and maybe think about how you can incorporate that so that you're meeting all the different standards of a student.
Hmm.
So I think that PLCs and working together, and again, that idea of, I might not agree with you and that's okay, is so important in today's society,
Hmm.
right? In teaching with our students, they might not agree with each other, and that's okay, but I'm listening to you, I'm being open-minded about it, and I'm learning from you, and I don't have to agree with you,
Yeah.
but we still need to work together.
Hmm. Hmm. So, for a teacher who wants to start creating a thinking classroom, where would they start?
I think one of the main things is going through your current unit.
Okay.
It's one of the things I think teachers get afraid of, and in fact, I was just at a conference talking to several teachers who said they're so tired of that. We have a new initiative this year.
Yeah.
We have another new, when we didn't finish last year's initiative, and now all of a sudden we have a new initiative. Not looking at this as an initiative, looking at
Yeah.
this as a way of thinking and doing. That you're
Yeah.
taking your existing curriculum. Look, I know I have to teach this rock, science unit, or this algebra unit, or this, chemistry. I know I have to teach it. these are the standards I have. I've been giving almost a script. I'm hearing that a lot from teachers right now. They're giving almost a script in their classroom. Starting with that and looking at, okay, where are the points where I'm allowing my students to take ownership, where I'm allowing my students the opportunity to fail without having any consequences to that failing? Where am I giving students feedback? Where am I allowing them to work together? If just asking some simple questions and then going back and rewriting some of your curriculum, adding your own personal take to the curriculum, your personal flair, so that kids are really seeing you as a facilitator. I think making sure too, for the teacher's sense of joy, making sure they're not doing all the work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a point where you say, you don't have to grade everything. Right. And giving yourself that freedom to not grade everything, but to allow the students to have that reflection time, that feedback time. And giving, you can give them feedback, but not necessarily a grade, so that they feel okay. They feel this sense of freedom in your classroom. I think looking at your lesson plan and starting with asking a few of the questions of, do I have opportunities for my students too? And then going from there, and not thinking that this is rewriting the whole thing. That's what I think is overwhelming, because we think that we have to rewrite our curriculum, or we have to, grade even more. And we need to allow ourselves that sense of freedom to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let my kids actually do that. That's where they're going to learn.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good way of starting. Like you said, look at where you can change up a few things to give kids more ownership and personalize what you're doing, rather than looking at a whole revamp, right? It's the small steps that go.
It's very small. I mean, I even say, just by saying to students, hey, be creative. If a student comes up to you and says, is this okay? Or what do you think? Saying, well, what do you think? Those simple little things in a day. There's research that says, even just like I said, telling a kid to be creative, it's almost like giving them permission to do something different, and that's okay for you in your classroom. So simple, tiny little steps like that can change the whole climate of a classroom.
So I mentioned in the bio that you're working on your doctorate. So what is the research that you're reading for your doctorate show about the need for creative and critical thinking, and talk a little bit about what you're researching in particular for your doctorate?
Sure. My doctorate will be in innovative teaching strategies. And one of the main things I'm looking at is, how can incorporating creative and critical thinking bring teachers more joy? And there's so many different aspects that I could go, but I really wanted to look at how this can change, especially when I said my trenches was, I was sitting in my car crying. But how can, if we allow this creative and critical thinking and we put that into our curriculum, how does that change our experience as teachers? Not necessarily the kids and this, standardized testing and all that, but really me, Katie, as I'm sitting in my classroom, how does this help me and bring joy back into my classroom, bring joy back into why I'm doing what I'm doing, and hopefully also lighten the load. So that's what I've been doing. I've been researching. It's interesting. The research that I'm doing, all of it says, yes, we need creative and critical thinking in the classroom. And I have all these statistics, but none of the research shows exactly how. A lot of the research says we need training. Teachers know it's important and they need to learn how, but there's nothing out there that really says how. So that's really where I've been putting my focus. With the CREATE method, we've created a CREATE method just to give teachers a framework of how you would do this. What would that look like? And so I've been talking to a lot of teachers, what they need, what they struggle with, and it's been really exciting to see where this is going.
And when will you be finished with your dissertation?
I have about a year and a half left.
Okay.
And I will be done. And it'll be all wrapped up in a pretty bow, hopefully.
Okay, so around December of 24.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll be on the lookout for that.
Excellent. Good.
So in terms of social and emotional learning, a lot of people are using a lot more of that in their classrooms and in their schools, in advisory classes, for example. How does this help us? How does creative and critical thinking help us with SEL? In terms of like students, just who are coming to school with a lot of anxiety and depression.
Right, right. And I think one of the things we have to stop thinking is NCL and SEL is the way of I'm gonna have a 10 or 15-minute session in my class. We're gonna talk about respect today.
Yeah.
And then we drop it and we move on to the algebra lesson.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a way that this is incorporated and infused. There's a lot of research out there that shows that being creative, allowing yourself that freedom will bring you more joy. It can take away your anxiety. It can take away some depression. If a student knows that they're going to come into my classroom and we're going to celebrate their failures, we are going to just kind of sit back and think why and what if, that the anxiety is released. I had a student, I just left the classroom about a year ago. And the last year that I was teaching, I had this very quiet student. She hardly said a word, even in group work, but she was very artistic. So I would allow her to just kind of doodle and draw in class. I didn't take that away from her. A lot of the assignments, I would say to her, how can you show me this skill through your creative way of thinking, through your artistic way of thinking? And she started to come out of this shell. And I remember the last day of class, she said to me, this is the first time, she was a junior in high school, this is the first time ever I've been able to make choices in my own learning. And I've learned more because I've been able to be creative. So I think that, part of that, and again, I had several students who have had ADHD and anxiety, and allowing them to have some freedom and choice. And a lot of the anxiety comes from, what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
And allowing students to be able to say, wait, so what if you're wrong? I'm wrong. I tell teachers it's always so important to be vulnerable with your students. For instance, saying, oh my gosh, you guys, last night I tried to make this souffle and I totally bombed it. It was terrible. I can't believe it. We wound up ordering pizza. Like, if Mrs. Trowbridge fails and she's laughing about it, then it must be okay for me to fail. It must be okay, and to let go of some of that anxiety. Embrace, have fun, laugh in your classroom. All those things can help with that social emotional learning. One of the biggest things too is that I said before, open-mindedness, being okay and thinking, oh, well, that's an interesting way to look at it, right? And acknowledging that that's an interesting way to look at it, and that's okay. And it might sound crazy and wild and silly, but it's still a great way. But that's also making a classroom climate that allows that, right? So that if a student says something wild and crazy, another student doesn't go, that's so stupid. What a dumb idea. You have to build that social emotional climate in your classroom where, whoa, that's not accepted. All wild and crazy ideas, we're going to celebrate them and have fun with them. And I hear that a lot from teachers. That's one of the things that they struggle with the most right now in their classrooms.
You mentioned a little bit about the LinkedIn article and how critical and creative thinking transfer to employment opportunities and soft skills. So can you dive a little bit more into some of these soft skills and something that can transfer from the K-12 environment to when students are looking for employment?
Yes. We always call them soft skills. And I think one of the things we need to start looking at them as their essential skills.
Yeah.
So even my husband, who is in the business world and managing several people, he has mentioned to me how, the new employees that he has, the younger employees that he have, they just want to Google the right answer. Right. So if there's a problem, if there's something that needs to be solved, it might not be on Google. Right. We have to have those problem solving skills in order to work together and communicate and collaborate. It's not all about our cell phones. It's not all about who we are in our little cubicle, but expanding. And I think that we have to start incorporating that into our K through 12 so that when they leave, and even when they go on to college, right, if they go into college or they go into a trade school or whatever, they know how to think through a problem on their own. And that's what I think employers are really wanting, because we have technology, we have a lot of this AI coming out. They just pull from the internet, AI pulls from the internet what's out there already, but we need the human on the other side saying, okay, well, this is what really works. Or here, how are we going to solve the climate, environment issues we have. You're not going to find that on Google, right? We have to work together to figure out ways to solve some of these problems. So that's where allowing, I think, in our classroom, that sense of ambiguity. More than ever, our students just don't know what's going to happen in the future. They've always said that we don't even know what jobs will be available for them in the future. All those kinds of things are what's so essential for employment. And because we know that employment in our world is changing. So if we aren't able to adapt to that, and aren't able to come up with ideas and be, again, okay with failure, and I hope that didn't work, now let's go on to the next one, we are going to fail our society. And so I think that that's where schools and employers need to work together, to say it's great that they know the multiplication table, but they can also use a calculator. What we really need to know is, how are we going to build this skyscraper? How are we going to, I also often talk about, in math class, let's look at how do we build a doghouse? And then we'll learn our skills through how we build a doghouse, because you might have to do that someday.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of skills I think that they're not even soft skills anymore as much as they are essential. Especially the communication. I've had parents tell me that they walk in to the living room, that their daughter or son, they're having a get together, and all their friends are together, and they walk in and they see every single person on their phone. They're not even talking to each other. Right. And if we don't learn how to talk to each other and collaborate with each other, we're not going to be the great problem solvers that we need to be for this future that's coming up.
Yeah, no, those are so important points, because like you said, a lot of these things that young employees are defaulting to, right? And or being on their phone when they're needing to communicate in the real world. So yeah, I think as teachers, if we can just make sure that we're instilling a lot of these creative and critical thinking skills into our students, then it will become easier for them once they move past their K-12 education.
Right. And I think, again, for the teacher, it will help them get out of the trenches. It'll help them to find some more joy as well, with what they're doing. And I know that there are so many teachers in the trenches right now. And just by bringing some joy to themselves and also joy for their students, they can have fun and enjoy that learning process again, find that reason why they went into teaching in the first place.
Well, we've had a great conversation today on how to infuse critical and creative thinking into your classroom, how to get started, work that you can do with colleagues, and really weaving SEL and creative and critical thinking together. Out of everything we talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think the best thing that we can do in education right now is collaborate with each other.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I want your listeners to remember is that it's okay to lean on each other, that it's okay to look to other people for advice, that they should be joining either an online network or really working in their PLCs, or just being okay with letting go of their stuff and allowing people to share it, and then accepting other people's information. Just that, as I said before, there's great power when educators work together for a common goal. And that's how I think we need to start shifting our perspectives and making sure that we are working with each other to support each other.
Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Well, there's the Creative Thinking Network. So if you go to the Creative Thinking Network, you can look at, we have 25 experts in creativity and education from around the world that are having webinars, that are doing courses. It's a great place to communicate and to say, I'm struggling with this lesson. Anybody have any advice? There's lesson plans on how to incorporate all of that. So creativethinkingnetwork.com. And then there's Curiosity to Create, which is the nonprofit organization that we really work with teachers. We workshop with them. We help them, coach them. We have a lot of resources to do exactly what you and I have been talking about. How do we infuse that? So either one of those two entities are easy to reach out to, as well as just emailing me. I'm always on my computer right now, emailing and talking to teachers, as well as traveling all over.
Great. Well, I'll make sure I include those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today and helping me learn more about just the benefits of creative and critical thinking in the classroom.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.